The psychedelic revolution is here. If you want to integrate your visionary experiences into your purpose, get clear on your entrepreneurial path, and help people while you do what you love, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur, Medicine for These Times. I'm your host, Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach, 3-time entrepreneur, and a lifelong student of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines. You carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. This podcast will help you to share your medicine so you can create transformation in the world. Listen in on conversations with psychedelic leaders, changemakers, and conscious entrepreneurs who are living proof that a better world is possible when you follow your heart and live in alignment with your soul. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am here with Rak Razam. Hey, Rak. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Beth. How are you?
So good. It's so good to see you and have you here again, joining us from way down under. So Rak Razam is an alchemical storyteller with his finger on the pulse of tomorrow and the heart of today. A screenwriter, documentary filmmaker, author, journalist, and culture maker, his focus is on the new cultural paradigm birthing in this brave new world. And you can find him at his website right here in the show notes, rakrazam.com. So Rak, thanks for being with us. Before we get into some questions, I would love to hear your own entrepreneurial story. How did you get into what you're doing now? You know, you're a writer, you're an editor, you're a filmmaker, you're a thought leader. You also, I think, still lead some retreats around the world in some places. But yeah, tell us, what was your path? You know, I always say, like, were you once a corporate attorney and had an awakening, or?
Well, I wasn't advertising, if that helps, very briefly. But I'm your anti sort of establishmentarian sort of corporate archetype here. You know, I describe myself as sort of a self-made mystic, and there's something in so-called hippie circles around this thing of abundance and money and the spiritual path. And I have a pretty good relationship with money, and I like abundance. There's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, it's always been a matter of, for me, of following the path and being shaped by it and learning from it. And it's been more of a challenge to then turn that into product or into some revenue stream, you know, in the current lexicon. So, you know, as an author, I do have 3 books. I have 3 documentaries. I've actually been taking the downtime here in Australia while we're in sort of military lockdown to work with a web team to redo my website and to look at revenue streams and all that stuff. It's necessary. And you know what I've just discovered over the years is, for me, the best balance is to have the interior connection to the realms that we're talking about here, the psychedelic, the spiritual, the human potential sort of realms that we're in. And then to be able to output it, and to be outputted, to communicate it, to share it, to teach it, to entrain people. And without both of those, the in-breath and the out-breath, you don't have the whole picture. So, you know, we want people of substance who have had experiences and wisdom to share. And in the modern marketplace, this is how we do it. You know, if it had been 2,000 years ago with Socrates and Plato, they would probably have apps and they would have, you know, membership sort of drives, you know. It's like you've got to pattern match the culture. And I must admit, I haven't been as attached to doing that most of my life. And I see the value now. I really see the value in consolidating and bringing together that wisdom package and what I do have to offer and the things that I have done and share and are going to be of value to the community. So what a big plug that's been, huh? So my website's not up again yet. It should be up before the end of the year, but it's going to be pretty amazing because there's been 15 years of content. I started off as an experiential journalist, which is sort of a shorthand for a gonzo journalist. Back in 2006, I was working for Australian Penthouse, and, you know, it's funny, Australian Penthouse, but it's like we needed alternative mainstream publications to comment on counterculture at the time. My first big writing gig was to go to Albert Hoffman's, who is the chemist who essentially discovered or made LSD. He was turning 100 years old and he had a symposium in Basel, Switzerland. And essentially, it was the event where the term psychedelic renaissance was coined and the world's psychedelic sort of cognoscenti all came together, and it was a watershed. And I wrote about that for all these different periodicals and publications, and that launched my career as a gonzo alternative journalist, which then segued 6 months later into the Amazon, and what became my books, Ira Awakenings, and the film Ira Awakenings, and then I never looked back, and that's my shorthand. Never look back.
No, it's so good. And wow, what an honor to be there at that original Albert Hoffman. Wow, not many people have had that experience, of course. But yeah, and I do agree with you on trying to figure out how to do all this in the 2021 world. Money still exists. It is part of the paradigm. There's more and more of a need. There's more demand for people trying to understand and make sense of what's happening in the world, what's happening with themselves, the healing, the traumas that they're dealing with. So let's talk a little bit about the medicine, because I have a lot of questions for you around that. So you in the past have also had a career in I don't know if it was facilitating or more facilitating groups, or let's hear a little bit about that. And are you still up to that? I mean, I know you've been pretty locked down for a while now, but
Well, yeah, to get to that, I have to sort of continue the introductory little chat there, because I started off on the path as a journalist, writing about basically counterculture, and as I said, like the LSD conference and festival culture, technology, spirituality, things that were interesting to me that weren't represented in the mainstream as much back then. And then, ayahuasca came along, and it was a matter of, working on all that. But as these things have, become more prominent in culture, they really have become part and parcel of what they're calling the psychedelic renaissance and the medical establishment's reclamation of psychedelics. So as I was on the path, though, what I discovered is that for me, on a spiritual journey, and I must say, back in like 2005, 2006, I would say I was spiritual, but I don't think I had the experience. I think I was open to things. I wasn't a closed mind, but I hadn't had the experiences which I then had in my initiations in the jungle in Peru and with plant medicines and things like that, which changed me from intellectually being open to a spiritual path to embodying the spiritual path. And I quickly realized that like ayahuasca and going down there to do the medicine and to work on reporting on what the archetype of the shaman was in the 21st century and why ayahuasca was a movement and so important. It was like it was all a cover story by the universe to get me down there. I mean, the universe didn't care what I was, a scientist, a journalist, someone who had, deep healing. It's like, just get there and do the work and have the experience. And I realized it's like it's all a cover story for you to go on this journey and have these experiences. And you might relate to this. It's like we think we're doing one thing, but there's always a deeper plan. And you almost, these words might not be hitting home for some listeners because maybe they haven't had these type of experiences. But if and when you do, for me, what happened was, a realization that we are embedded in a live and intelligent ecosystem, i.e., Mother Nature, Gaia, whatever we call it, and the cosmos in general, and that there is a deeper intelligence and a wisdom and a teaching, and there's no separation. Like one of the biggest sort of takeaways from psychedelics we know from the neuroscience is that essentially they're ego dissolvers, or they help to reduce the default mode network, this regional cluster of the brain, which sort of keeps us on this channel of reality. So our consciousness can go traveling in the wider spectrum of reality, which many indigenous and Western proto cultures have documented. But on that path, you realize that the universe is bigger and it's more intelligent, it's potentially more loving, because we're really blocked as a human species. We're really traumatized and we're not feeling, we're not connected, and we're trapped up in the mind, which is why we have all these ego anxieties and stresses and traumas. We just don't know how to let go. So, the psychedelic medicines are getting all the press because they can help alleviate these conditions, but that's the tail end, or the sort of subsidiary effects of the primary experience of psychedelics, which is to reconnect. And that's the original Latin for religion, is to reconnect, So I've gone on this journey, and it's been like a 15 plus year journey, and there's no end in sight. And so as part of that, this evolution of the journey, it's trained me. And so I don't work with ayahuasca, but I do lead groups down for the last 8 years now. I've been working with Percy Garcia Lozano, a really respected curandero in Peru. And as an evolution of what became my book, Aya Awakenings, and the Ayahuasca Sessions, the second book, and the film Aya Awakenings, there came a point after touring that and working on that for many, many years to get that documentary out, where I was left like, what do I do next? I've completed like this big life milestone. And as a friend suggested, well, maybe you want to go back to the jungle. And I was like, yeah, I'll go back to the jungle, but looking after people, retreats, And then I thought into it, and then it was like, wow, it actually brought out this whole part of my skill base, which is it's empathic, space holding, and as the Gemini and the wordsmith, and running things and events. And so it became something I was really, really loved, and really loved going back to the jungle and experiencing ayahuasca myself. So I've been doing those ayahuasca retreats just once a year, usually around the June solstice, and we managed to do it this year, even amongst all the COVID pandemic. And then, in 2015, the Buffalo Various toad entered my life, and that became the subject of another documentary and a large thrust of my event organization and community building. And as part of that, over the years, I have trained with many different practitioners. Basically, I just fell into service, into wanting to help, into wanting to support. And the Buffalo Various medicine is very new in Western culture. It doesn't have an established lineage like the ayahuasca traditions. And so I guess I was the right person in the right place at the right time, and just fell into helping anchor and form and establish, bring together a community around the World Buffalo Various Congress and other events. And as part of that, I've been working to facilitate the medicine of the Buffalo Various tribe in countries where it is legal.
The legal part. Yes, I have actually lots of questions for you around the bufo and the toad. But, you did say something about showing up in service. And this is a huge piece of what I talk about a lot with my clients and, in my programs, and with what I do, is coming from this deeper place in our being, in our soul, that's like, what do you want to see change in the world? What is it that you're here for besides you and your ego-based self? And yes, we all are on our healing journey, but when you step into this other place of like, okay, how do I show up and serve? Then I've noticed over time, things start to move a lot quicker and manifest a lot easier. And maybe you're getting taken to, the right time at the right place, like you said, and the opportunities open. And I'm curious, what are your views? Because this is something I've been exploring for years, is what are your views on how psychedelics and plant medicines can actually help people find this deeper place in them that's a path of purpose, like that's a path of their soul? Meaning like, okay, maybe you were working in a corporate job that you really hated because you just needed to survive, but then you start to realize you actually want to do something else. Do you believe that these medicines are here to awaken this in us? And do you think that it might have a large scale effect on the planet at all?
These are good questions, but there's a root system to the answers, in that there's not an easy, pat answer. If we go back to the example of the 60s with psychedelics, which obviously was different set and setting, that's another term from the 60s, but back then there was this revolutionary potential that essentially what people realized is that we're in a cultural paradigm. We could call it Western culture, we could call it capitalism, we could call it 21st century, we could use different labels. But we're like goldfish in the water, and we're oblivious to it most of the time. And so there's that. And then you have to take the term, what is this awakening, right? What does it mean to awaken? And in the spiritual terms, it means to be self-aware of who and what you really are. And so, well, who and what are we? And I mean, there's many levels to this. There's, okay, what traumas are we carrying? What have we gone through in our life experiences? How can we release those things? How can we be the best us we can be? And that's within us. And then collectively, how can we be the best civilization and culture, we can be on the planet? And the thing is, capitalism is essentially the issue. It's the elephant in the room that we don't discuss. And maybe there's sustainable methods of that. But if we look at where we are on the planet today, we're in an ecological crisis, we're in a social crisis, There's all these things hitting the fan, and the isms of the way that we had steered our civilization have had an impact, which are now coming in a blowback to affect us. And so in the 60s, there was this promise that we could have a revolution of that paradigm and live in a more equitable and sustainable way. People might interpret that now as, pipe dreams and hippie idealism. And yeah, it was to a very large degree. But the thing is, without a vision, without a plan, without a mission statement, I mean, even if you take the corporate sort of rollout here, you need to have it delineated. You need to have goals. You need to have milestones. You need to have a concrete understanding of what it is you're trying to manifest. And so, what I perceive, having been on this spiritual path and having my horizons broadened, is that it gives you the vision of where we're at, where we could be at. And the thing is, I really believe we need the foundations of the marketplace and of the civilization we've established and of the resources and of the reach to implement that vision. We need both. It's like we described at the start. It's not about throwing everything away and becoming Luddites and living in a cave, like in prehistoric times, or just being a hippie and getting out of it. It's like we have these tools at our disposal to help heal us individually. But what we're finding with the needed and the much fought for psychedelic renaissance, which is this reclamation of the psychedelic substances, which all the current testing across the world is proving that these have medical value. These have healing potentials which can help, heal PTSD, chronic resistant PTSD, anxiety, stress, for the terminally ill. Even if you're not terminally ill, it's like you can be on this path of self-discovery. They're amazing tools with therapeutic use, used in the right set and setting, can be transformative, incredibly transformative. And they're going to replace pharmaceuticals and SSRIs in the next 5 to 10 years, guaranteed. There's been studies come out showing, as antidepressants, that they work a lot more efficiently. But the thing with the psychedelics is, potentially a few rounds of psychedelics and maybe with the therapeutic training, and then you may be better. I mean, you may not need a course of SSRIs for years or decades. So it starts to impinge upon the profit model of the paradigm that we're in. So I was just on a panel discussion with Microdose.buzz, which is like, I guess, a new startup, or maybe not so new, looking at psychedelics. And, there was a lot of talk around the business of psychedelics. And we did a panel discussion on 5-MeO-DMT and the future of the science of spirituality. And we had to try to break it to them. It's like these aren't just like the red pills that everyone has and it has this effect. These are incredibly powerful psychedelic substances. And for instance, with 5-MeO-DMT, they can totally, have this rebirth experience of ego dissolving and rebirthing. And sure, maybe maybe you will stop smoking afterwards, or you'll have less anxiousness. But it's like using an atomic bomb to light the stove. It's like this incredible potential of these substances. And, some of the recent science has shown, I think it was Johns Hopkins back in 2006, it's the mystical experience. And again, these are labels from maybe another paradigm, but there's this qualitative experience psychedelic can engender of reducing the default mode network in the egoic mind and allowing our consciousness to merge back into the unity field or non-dual state, or have a transcendent experience. And it's because there's this release and letting go. It's like a cork comes off a bottle and it releases any energy trapped in the energetic body, the emotional body, or things caught up in all the template. It's that release, that ego dissolving release in the fullness, that then has the healing effect. I mean, and there's scientific literature proving that in their studies. And so it's getting very difficult to separate the spiritual or the healing capacity of these substances from the effect not just on the individual, but from what that might do to the culture, which comes full circle to this 60s idea. So at the moment, there's this commodification and pigeonholing of these powerful substances through the FDA and through all the peer-reviewed studies. They're coming back in as healing mechanisms under therapeutic use, under the doctor's supervision, which is what's needed. But they're coming into a time when we're in hypercapitalism. And hypercapitalism is got all the startups and all the investment pitch decks, and they're going crazy like rabid piranhas for all in on psychedelic startups. And so there's this question of, I guess, medical integrity in the long run. Yes, these are healing substances, And if you have shareholders and return on investments, and there's a very seminal story that was written about 18 months ago called "We Will Call It Pala," Pala, which is a line from the Aldous Huxley Island book, which is really all about a psychedelic community in the future. And it was mapping this woman's startup. She was a healer. She gets into healing. She wants to share it with the world. She has, her own benefits, and she wants to bring that to the community. All good and well. She goes through the medical establishments. She sets it up. She gets the company structure. Investors come on board. Turn on investment. Eventually, she realizes in the system that it starts to degrade around the edges, where it's about profit margins, and then maybe integration is outsourced to an app, which is what they're doing now. It's like, so psychedelics are coming into this hyper-capitalist paradigm, and I'm not actually saying it's a bad thing. It's inevitable, right? And I'm also not even against like shareholders and return on investment in the capitalist model. But what I'm saying is it's shaken all up in a bottle, and it's going to have all these effects that we can't see yet. And so what happened in the 60s was it happened too fast and too soon, and it created an equal and opposite like thermodynamic pushback from the establishment. Richard Nixon declared, war on drugs. In fact, it was yesterday, your time, October 6, 1966, that LSD was declared illegal. And so what did the hippies do? They had thousands of people in Golden Gate Park and had the bee in. They had another celebration of their revolutionary potential as individuals in the community to have ecstasis and have this celebration outside the medical model, because the medical model is not the only model. It's not the social model. It's not the community model. It's maybe not the religious or spiritual model, even though that will arise in the medical model as well. But that got quashed back in the 60s, even though it had the effect it needed to in the culture at the time. But the promise back then was this revolutionary transformation of the paradigm that we live under, that our consciousness expands, it sees more interconnections. We have seen from the science that there's this hypercoherence on psychedelics. And so we are working on this more optimal platform of consciousness, right? But it's not just mental, it's actually also on these other levels, and working on the healing and working on the spirit as well. So what I see happening now is almost like the slow food movement. It's like there's this organic movement that's threading through. And the medical psychedelic renaissance is, it's getting an amazing amount of positive press. MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, has been the vanguard organization pushing this back into the mainstream for the last 35 years or so. And great kudos to them. And it's part of a bigger paradigm. It's part of a bigger transformation of society, because it's not just the man-made chemicals from the lab, it's also the entheogens from the earth, and these are healing things. And so if we can be healed as individuals, it has the ripple effects in the culture. And so the question is, what is the bigger vision? Where is this all going? Let's say great return on investment, and great that, psychedelic companies are starting up. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. So where is it headed? What does it point to? And I believe potentially it points to a radical transformation of society that psychedelics alone are not doing. But it's part of this transformation point. And so I think that, what we haven't really discussed, and what we don't really discuss, because it almost seems embarrassing almost to discuss this, but we need a cultural vision. It's like, when it's just embedded in capitalism and it's return on investment and people are healing, and it's like, okay, great, that'll be great. But then what? What a lot of people say, and is really true, is that it's not just about the peak experience. It's about what happens after your psychedelic experience. It's about the integration. So what I would ask is, what's happening with the cultural integration? Or where are the studies looking at, when we're healed from our anxieties and stresses of the battery farm of modern civilization, what do we do then with this psychedelic experience? Do we need to be sick to have it? Can we be well? Can we be optimized? Can we be even better? Can we be connected to something bigger? Can we come together as a collective group of people, like indigenous communities do, and do psychedelics and entheogens? And what will that mean to our cohesion, to our togetherness, to our sense of identity? And these issues aren't really being discussed yet. Everyone's trying to get psychedelics legalized and through the door, but what's that going to do to us in the big picture? So I think the root system is there, that the meetups and the integration societies and the psychedelic societies and the decriminalized nature societies. Seattle just decriminalized this week. And it's snowballing everywhere. And so I think the next step will be to have these cultural conversations of what is it doing to us, and where are we going with this, and can we transform society? Of course, the powers that be have a lot of leverage and their hold on the paradigm through the capitalist institutions. But if enough people aren't opposing it, but are diverting it and choosing ethical, sustainable pathways to transform capitalism because they've been transformed, then I think that might be the way to go.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing all this. You touched on so much that it's been coming up for me. It's been coming up for a lot of clients and other interviews I've had is how do we get this right? Because I personally even struggle with it. This is called the psychedelic entrepreneur because I help a lot of people become coaches and healers and a lot of people who are on this path. But at the same time, even I struggle with, like, how do we get this all into balance? Like, yes, money still exists. We still have capitalism. To me, it's not ideal. I don't love the system. But we have to be part of the system. And then I really believe we have to be part of the system in order to change the system, because yes, of course, there's a desire to go run off and live on a mountain and just check out from society. But I don't know if that's how we actually create the real change in the world. Because it's like the systematic change from within. So I'm curious, do you know anyone who's working on, I know some of the thought leaders out there who are writing about like, okay, well, where do we go and what's wrong and how do we do this? But then there's never really, I find there's, I've struggled with this where I feel helpless. Like, what can I do other than my piece? But are there people out there who are starting to discuss this? Like, what could our world look like? Or is this just something that's going to start happening over time? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's impossible to sort of talk about this without looking at the world situation. And, it's pretty temperamental. I'm not even talking like COVID and control mechanisms and potentially New World Order, Orwellian, Great Reset, cashless society, surveillance culture, social credit score, which is all coming in the West in the days ahead. I'm really talking about the ecological crisis and the fact that we've crossed 8 of the 10 tipping points and we're living through the 6th great species extinction. And unless we're facing the facts, unless we have a real grasp of where we're really at in late 2021 moving into the near future, we can't really respond to what the needs of the times are. And again, and it's like it's been hundreds, if not thousands of years of the system, the models, whatever labels we give it, of how we engage with the planet. So the great thing about psychedelics and entheogens is that, they do dissolve the default mode network, but there's this felt sense of feeling, of connection. And, my little shorthand as a writer about this is I've had these intuitions and these downloads in the spaces is that we basically, it feels like we have species PTSD. And we know, in the historical record, all of history is no more than 12,000 years old. If you go back to the archaeological record, there may have been proto-societies, and there's people like Graham Hancock who argue for, that things are older than we think they are, and that may very well be true. But essentially, there was a meteor impact or something that happened 12,800 years ago called the Lower Dryas extinction event. And it caused another little mini ice age. And basically, we've gone from our relationship with nature, we've gone from a relationship of connection and of openness to contraction and closeness. And we see this in microcosm in psychedelic experiences, is that people are armored, people are shut down, and people are holding on to their fears and traumas and grief. If you see nature documentaries, animals, when they're in flight and fear experiences, they will shake out, with their body, they will shake out what they've been holding on to. Humans hold on to it. And also there's this recent science of epigenetics, which points to the fact that everything the parents go through passes down to the child and goes down the family line. It's genetics, not just karma or some hippy-dippy thing. It's actually, there are imprints on the developing fetus and in you that you're carrying your parents' energy and down the line. And so, something happened to humanity 12,800 years ago. A lot of indigenous cultures have stories of world ages and of cyclic time and of a deeper connection to the earth. Here in Australia, the Australian Aborigines have this term that we call in Western culture dream time, this fact that there's different stages of consciousness or our ability to connect in different ways to the earth, but we've shut down. And so this whole arc of history feels to me like we've gotten used to it, but this is a traumatized response. Like the normal baseline consciousness we're in, even if you don't have any personal trauma, you don't think you do, we've inherited this shut down, traumatized pain body, as Gabor Mate might say. And then this is the new normal. So it's like over the tracks of time, over thousands of years and hundreds of years in post-industrial revolution, our relationship to the planet from that separated, traumatized pain body has been to separate from nature, to protect ourselves from nature. And so we've fallen into this extractive, imperialistic tendencies to take and to build separate from nature, and there are cultures and indigenous communities which still, we don't have to necessarily give up the technological advances, but we just have to figure out ways to be more sustainable about that and to not leave the impact we're leaving. And so the culmination of all this has been to contribute to global warming and to contribute to this emergency that we're in, right? And so the current state of affairs is grimmer than most people will admit, although the mainstream media is being forced to because of the new extreme weather events and things that are happening. And it's like, I've been researching this. I've been doing a screenplay set in the Arctic and researching things, but things are really, unprecedentedly bad on planet Earth. We're reaching this point in the next few years where it's not going to be business as usual. So this question is, why are we here? Who are we, right? And not just when we take these substances, that's the training wheels. We have this spiritual nature within us, and we're embedded in the planet. And the planet, from my understandings, is an alive and intelligent ecosystem and being, right? And we're extensions of it. And all the other species know that, or they're working for the benefit. They go, it's almost like permaculture, but I call it planet culture. It's like they go with the rhythms and they contribute to the energy exchanges and that. But we don't. We're like this stagnation. So part of this phase we're in is to come back into right relationship with the planet, to live in a more sustainable way, to transform capitalism and the industrial sort of revolution into the post-industrial information, sustainable, technologies, ways that we can maintain civilization, but do it in a way that is not carbon emitting and not opposing the flows and the rhythms of planetary energies. And we have a very short amount of time to do that. So in terms of this awakening, we really need to wake up very, very suddenly. And we need the support network to do that. So back in the 60s, when there was this mass awakening with LSD, it hit so suddenly, they didn't necessarily have the support mechanisms. They drew upon the elderhood of India as, models of consciousness, because they didn't have their localized elders. So now we have that psychedelic root system. We have the intergenerational support network of people who still are alive from the 60s and the 80s and the noughts and onwards. And we have, we have the indigenous cultures who are now, connecting with people and touring, and ayahuasca's come out, and psilocybin's come out, and San Pedro, and 5-MeO-DMT, and we have a shamanic, what I call the global shamanic resurgence, which was equally big, if not bigger, than the medical psychedelic renaissance. It maybe gets a little bit less press because it doesn't have the identity and the Western PR machine behind it. They talk about ayahuasca a lot, but they haven't quite identified that ayahuasca is the vanguard of a global shamanic resurgence coming out of the jungles. And, it's coming to the people, it's coming to the cities, and people have trained, and to segue here, I have a show called shamansoftheglobalvillage.com, and this is what we look at. We look at people like myself who have experienced entheogenic medicines, shamanic medicines, and a lot of people then feel the call to action. They feel the call to be in service, as we've discussed. to their communities, and they've trained and they have the lineages of the indigenous communities' shamanic practices, and then they bring that out to the West, and they live in their communities in the West, and they may be growing and working with the entheogens, and there's been this entheogenic transfer from the old world to the new. And so I see that this is it's just the tip of the iceberg, you know, it's like this is happening and people are resensitizing and reweaving and remembering, you know, the relationship. And so there's this potential to connect to the planet and feel it, but it's almost like it needs to marry with the ecological movement, with a lot of the other, you know, every 10 years or so, there's like an Occupy movement or an anti-globalization movement. There are these natural resetting cultural movements which are part of this feeling that we know what should be done, but it just gets opposed by the mainstream mechanisms of control, which want to keep the paradigm the same and keep, you know, the system the same. But it's coming to this point where it can't remain the same, and there's these sort of release valves where psychedelics are coming in and helping release and transform a little bit. But there's this whole lot of stuff all happening at once. Like the destruction and the breakdown of the old paradigm and the old world is happening at the same time that the awakening is happening. And so, yeah, that's where we're at. But it's like we need to acknowledge what the parameters of where we're at really are, you know, and not whitewash them or greenwash them. Things are pretty stark, but if you've had a deep spiritual transformative experience, you realize one of these ultimate lessons that we're not in control, right? It's like Dennis McKenna, the famous brother of Terence McKenna and founder of the McKenna Institute, and a scientist in his own right. He has this great phrase. He says, it's the monkey mind. He says, we think we're in control. And, you know, ayahuasca's told him, it's just the monkey mind. You're not in control. There's something bigger than us that is steering this whole thing, right? And you have to trust that. But you can't trust that if you've never felt that. And so the great value of these substances is not just personal healing, it's connection to something bigger, whatever label you give that. And it's something which has to be felt, to be known. So it's not just faith, it's not just this blind mental trust. It's not about the ego. It's about this connection where you feel the truth, and that's what transforms you. And so globally, we're all having our individual experiences and awakenings, and the root system of the psychedelic and shamanic networks is very pronounced now. And I see a turning of the corner where as we start to acknowledge the environmental emergency, the emergence will come, right? The ability to respond to that. And I think it will come from the people and the networks who can hold space for the collective in the times ahead. Is that you have to know yourself, you have to have these deep experiences, you have to let go of the fear, you have to trust, and you have to empty yourself to be a vessel for what wants to come through. And so that needs not just a hippy dippy type of response of kumbaya. It needs also, as we said at the start, the planning and the visioning and the implementation. But for what? You have to be able to connect to have the vision, and then you need to be able to roll out that vision. So, you know, Elon Musk just tweeted this week, had a response saying that he thinks psychedelics could be very valuable for people, you know. And a lot of cultural leaders are coming around to psychedelics, right? And the thing is, it's bigger than us all, but we need to have this vision. And I see that all the constituent parts are there to work on this. And I think that it's going to organically evolve, that we will realize, oh, like there's something that needs to be done. But first we need, it's a timing thing. But I have faith and I have hope that, you know, what we're going through with these experiences is just the first step, and that there's something bigger which is coming, and that we are being prepped and we are being potentially healed so we can actually respond from a place of wholeness and sovereignty and make the decisions we need to make moving forward. So I have big hopes.
I'm like, these are all my prayers so much because, you know, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure anybody who's listening who's worked with ayahuasca or even DMT or psilocybin, you know, for me, it's been a very felt earth experience as well, where it's like, okay, well, now I know it's like you said, like the experiential feeling of like everything I learned from my Buddhist teacher is actually true. We are all connected. We're all one, but to actually feel the earth speaking to me, through me, and telling me, like, here's how to live in right relationship and right harmony and be more sustainable, and like each person starting within themselves. And then, my hope, as well as what you said, is that the growth in these plants and the psychedelics and the entheogens, that it does spark something off, especially as more and more leaders and more people with money and power and, the people who are in positions to make the change, have that felt experience where they're like, well, you know what, maybe it is time to do something about this. Because honestly, we have no other choice. Like you said, it's going to get to a point where we're going to have to react anyways. So, how do we want to be and how do we want to show up in that? One question I have for you, as because you had mentioned that you were on this recent panel with the DMT. I think it was like this whole DMT series or seminar. More and more, I have been hearing over the years of people becoming facilitators of the toad medicine, or maybe even synthetic, but in particular the toad, especially here in America. Every day there's someone I know that's like, well, I facilitate toad. And then there was this Tim Ferriss article that came out, I think last year or maybe 8 months ago, you might have seen, where he wrote and said, well, this is, we need to stop doing these medicines so much, the frog, the combo, the DMT, the ayahuasca, because we're not holding this in a sustainable way. Like, they're becoming endangered and peyote's, running out and people are pillaging. What are your views on trying to get this balance right of like the demand is there for the healing, more and more people keep hearing about it and they want the healing, but then there's the opposite. It's like, okay, well, people are harvesting ayahuasca the wrong way, or the toad is going extinct, or whatever it is. I mean, what are your views on the sustainability even within the entheogens and plant medicine?
Well, yeah, it's actually it's more nuanced and complicated than you would think. So, to just take it on face value, yes, these things have to be sustainable. And it's all about supply and demand. So it's pretty ironic that Tim Ferriss is saying that when he has tens of millions of audience and has been promoting psychedelics for many years and has put millions of dollars into the research, which is all good and well. It's supply and demand. And again, so there's a difference. The difference, one of the ways to look at this is psychedelics, which comes from the word Greek, the mind, opening the mind, psyche, the mind, that was coined in the 50s. Back in the 20th century, one of the first entheogens, and entheogens was coined in the 80s to get away from the stigma of psychedelics, and it's usually applied more to plant and earth medicines that are from the earth, not made in a lab. A little bit interchangeable, the terms, but the difference I'm trying to point at is the sustainability is more applicable for the entheogens made from the earth. And this has been the same for everything that comes from the earth, because the earth has its natural rhythms, and it has, one of the first entheogens was mescaline, which is from the San Pedro cactus, and the peyote as well has a type of mescaline in it. It's a type of cactus. These were some of the first substances that Western people in the late 1900s or the early 1900s, late 1890s even, experienced. Aldous Huxley had synthetic mescaline and had that experience when he wrote The Doors of Perception, Heaven and Hell. And so, if it's from the earth, then the sustainability issue is, can it scale? And if it's from a lab, it's more likely to scale. And so that's one way to look at it, a dichotomy of how we could scale things. A lot of people feel that, for them, the organic substance is often more natural. It has a more complex chemical signature. Mescaline has like 23 different alkaloids, or the cactus does, mescaline on its own. Same with things like iboga, the African root, healing, and you can extract ibogaine. Technically, you could extract harmine and harmaline and add a DMT source. You can make, synthetic ayahuasca. There is synthetic 5-MeO DMT made in a lab. And people have this dichotomy in the conversations. It's like organic versus synthetic. And so some people feel that the organic is better. And some people say, well, it's no different. If it's pure, the substance, you don't want it, muddied and not clean. But if you have, like, for instance, 99.9% pure 5-MeO synthetic DMT, and you have toad medicine, well, what's the difference? It takes the pressure off the toad. And so, yes, I mean, there's something here that there's a lot of promotion of psychedelics and entheogens now going out, and we call it the pollen effect after Michael Pollan. When his book came out in 2018, How to Change Your Mind, New York Times bestselling writer, millions of people are now interested in psychedelics, millions more. That book really directly influenced a generation of mainstream people, of mums and pops and dads and mums, and to get into psychedelics because everyone wants the healing. I lived in America for 2 years, and it's like there's so many. I mean, the SSRIs and the antidepressants and the pharmaceutical industry, everyone's sort of on something, but it's debilitating and it's gotten to the point where it's not serving, and they know they've got to transit to something better. So anyway, the psychedelics are heavily promoted now, and everyone knows about them. And so the issue is, can we scale this experience to the masses? You know, and so certain things can scale. LSD can certainly scale, as they proved in the 60s. Psilocybin could scale both in a synthetic version and even in the mushrooms if they're done and they're grown, because they grow very rapidly. Ayahuasca is there's movements afoot in Peru where they are regrowing ayahuasca for every vine cut down, one should be planted. And what has happened over time is an industry has developed, and so this has echoes of, the extractive resources. They say in Peru, for instance, they've had three waves. They had the rubber boom, they had the oil boom, and now they're having the ayahuasca boom. And regardless of the commodity, it's the same extractive processes going back to the old world and extracting it for Westerners who want to have the experience. So it's sort of inevitable. What it needs to be, as we described before, it needs to be sustainable. And so there are many, many movements, and there needs to be education there could even be like maybe a tax, but a donation. Every ceremony that's happening, in South America should be having a feedback loop to replant ayahuasca. It takes about 7 years to grow to fruition at a minimum. And so if 1 million more people come and want to do ayahuasca, well, there's not enough ayahuasca. The same with any maybe except for psilocybin that could scale. So it's both about the sustainability and the container of the experience. And so, again, people are just thinking of the substance, but you talked about toad facilitators. It's also about the set and setting. It's about the ceremony or the container of the experience, and everything needs to scale. So behind this, what we're really saying is the entire world is lit. It's switching on. It's coming back to psychedelic substances, right? And entheogens. And how do we scale this to be sustainable for the entire world? Because a vast majority of people are coming into this arena, okay? And so there are ways, like with toad, for instance, there's been, obviously, as a living creature, it has a sacredness, and there needs to be a sustainable, ethical harvesting of toad medicine. I tried about 2 years ago, we founded Fair Trade Toad in Mexico, and it's gotten pretty bogged down in local politics. Basically, the toad, for instance, it only lives in the north of Mexico in the Sonoran Desert, which is both narco drug territory and incredibly impoverished indigenous communities, essentially like reserves, where you'd have the same with Native Americans, or here in Australia with Aboriginals, is that these are devastated communities that don't necessarily even have electricity or running water. So basically the money we raised for Fair Trade Toad got sunk into sort of development programs for the indigenous to try to lift them out of poverty, to get to a starting point where they could then have the resources to go look at the toads and be caretakers for the toads. So, Hamilton Morris, he's done 3 episodes on toads with the Pharmacopoeia series for Vice and promoted toads. But then in the last round, and good on him, pointing out the sustainability and encouraging people to move to the synthetic. So I support that as well. I personally feel that toad medicine is my monogamous entheogen, and that there is something for me that is more holistic in the toad medicine. People will say it's the same. There's 17 different alkaloids in toad medicine, and there's just one, 5-MeO in the synthetic. It's up to the individual, really. But I mean, what we're talking about on a larger level is how do we scale this? And remembering from my experience, all of these, whether they're made in a lab or from Mother Nature, they're all training wheels. I really feel after 15 years of working with ayahuasca that the spirits and the plants and the doctores, and they say to me, it's like, you can do this too, right? There's this phrase in the culture saying, you are the medicine. And we are, but we've forgotten. So the tryptamines, which are very close to neurotransmitters, and I read something from Dennis McKenna the other day, and he was saying, NN-DMT and the tryptamines are in basically all plants, they think now, and they're in all mammals, all animals, they're in human beings. We produce tryptamines in our lungs, in our cerebrospinal fluid, and it's kept at bay by MAO, monoamine oxidase inhibitors in our body, so we're not in an altered state all the time. But we have the same things that nature has put in the plants and the fungi and the earth medicines, but we're just not accessing them. So we're learning from an external source how to activate this capacity in our spiritual nature, but they're training wheels. And what they reveal, they've done, science has done legal studies thanks to the psychedelic renaissance and the legal medical studies. They've done EEG and MRI scans of people meditating and monks meditating, and people on, like, say, 5-MeO, identical brainwave things. And what it's showing is all that we have to do, and this is the big all, and this is the thing that we've been basically trapped in for 12,000 years, is we have to reduce the mind, the ego. We have to lower the gate of the mind. And that's what the psychedelics are assisting us to do. They're helping us remember that we're bigger than just our intellectual ego. That the intellectual ego, from my perspective, has come forward in our development as a protective mechanism and as a trauma response mechanism. We have global PTSD, even those of us who think we're not injured, because we're up here. And all the psychedelics do is they lower the default mode network, and with 5-MeO, it's lowering frontal parietal lobes and your sense of ego and identity. And they're helping us see that we're more than that. We're more than our mind. Our mind is beautiful, and we don't want to kill it. It's not about ego death. It's about lowering it, because we're armored. We're stuck in our minds, and that's why we're going crazy, right? And so the great value with these substances is to lower the mind, but we can do that ourselves. So I see this whole generation of re-engagement with earth, plant, medicines, psychedelics, and entheogens as training wheels to remember how to do it ourselves. And I think the more of us that come together in the integration groups, integration is not just coming back to normal after a traumatic psychedelic experience. It's about harnessing who you are, what you connected to. It's about putting it into practice every day. And I've got to say, I need to do this too, right? It's to have a practice. It's to use perhaps breath work, meditation, tantra, whatever works for you, to tune into yourself. Because as we have a big psychedelic experience, as we expand and we let go, and our individualness merges back into the unity field and the oneness and the Gaian sort of network, we can release our traumas, we can release our anxieties, stresses, things we've been holding on to consciously or unconsciously. But also, as we connect, if we hold that relationship in our beings, if there's a desire to feel that every day, it's shown us the path. It's shown us what is there. And then we have to do the homework of walking that path every day. So you can meditate, you can do breath work, you can do whatever works for you, but you can lower that mind, you can tune in, and we can connect. We have the same things the plants have. We have the tryptamines in us. In total darkness, we know that the human organism will let go of the melatonin and the other tryptamines. Basically, over time, we will go into a psychedelic experience endogenously through our own capacity with the right settings. And so we can have this relationship with the spaces psychedelics reveal because we are psychedelic. We're just getting over our personal and collective traumas to remember. So these things are the great training wheels. They're here for a short time. So yes, we should be sustainable. Our entire global civilization should be sustainable, and it's not. And according to the world's leading scientists, it's like we are in, a species extinction target window here, and we have very short amount of time left. I mean, please look into it. Don't just listen to me. Look into this. Look up Arctic Blogspot. It's a collection of Arctic researchers and leading scientists who have no agendas. They have no corporate interests. They have no government sort of, things. But they're just saying, the Arctic is it's like 90 degrees Fahrenheit over the summer. I mean, the jet stream is broken, the new extreme weather around the world. I mean, we're in this event horizon of imminent planetary transformation, right? And the point is, yeah, we should be sustainable with psychedelics, and we don't have much time. So if they're there to use strategically to help hustle along that awakening process, and then if awakened collective humanity could make different decisions to break out of the paradigm that we're in, this box of both capitalism and history, then maybe we can respond in a different way, which will have a different outcome. I mean, wasn't it Albert Einstein who said you can't change the problems with the consciousness which created the problems? So we need to have a deeper reservoir of consciousness individually and collectively, and we need it very soon. And so in that level, let's use in a strategic way all the resources of all these substances that we can, right? And I'm not necessarily saying we should go out and eat all the peyote and all the iboga and it's gone. But the thing is, we could all be gone in a generation. So we need to have a twofold path of sustainability of entheogenic psychedelic resource management and an awareness that we need imminent awakening in a strategic and responsible way. So let's use all these resources. And, the root system is all there with the psychedelic renaissance, with the global shamanic resurgence, with all the psychedelic societies around the world. We have hundreds of millions of people who are part of a psychedelic community, and we have the internet like this to connect. But I think imminently there's going to be a next step, which is bringing it all together, right? And I say, especially with something like 5-MeO, which for me is the light at the star at the top of the Christmas tree. It's the light, the star of life. But it's endogenous. The difference between 5-MeO, DMT, and most of the other entheogens is it's within you, and it never really goes away. You can have endogenous reactivations. And so if you get a room of toadsters together and you do breathwork, rebreathing exercises, you can have a reactivation into the space. It's like, wow, I mean, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we all coming together and discovering the medicine within? Because that's the next step. You are the medicine. Let's feel it. Let's do it.
Yeah. Oh, so well said. And I actually agree with that. I keep saying that the psychedelics are here to take us back full circle, and and this is what I've been experiencing with my life, is just doing less and less of it, because I'm like, well, wait a second. There's a point where you just you don't need the peak experiences like you used to. And it's woken me up to so much of what you mentioned. It's like there's, the energy in our body and the potential. And I actually recently reached a state I have only reached with ayahuasca and DMT, with a 4-hour meditation. I mean, granted, it was a really deep meditation, but it was incredible because I got to navigate it like I never had before. And I was like, this is great, no drugs. But Rak, let's find out, what do you have upcoming? What should people be on the lookout for, follow you, or how can they stay in touch with you and your work?
Well, I've taken this downtime to sort of look within. It's been a challenging time here in Australia with so many lockdowns and police state sort of things happening. But I have been consolidating a lot of my work over the last 15 years, and my website will be relaunched before the end of the year. And as part of that, there's this whole realization that I've consolidated what I'm about, and it's really, the deeper purpose of psychedelics and consciousness, and this map of the big picture. And psychedelics are one node on the network journey. And so that will be relaunching before the end of the year. You can also find my work on aya-awakenings.com. I lead retreats every June. There's 2 books, The Aya Awakenings, which is my memoir about my time in Peru and the mythic archetype of the shamans and the ayahuasca movement and experience, and the ayahuasca sessions, another book. And we have the brand Shamans of the Global Village, which is documentary series looking at the role of the shaman again, and different earth medicines. The first one was on the Bufalvarius toad in Mexico, and then we did another episode on peyote in Mexico. And I'm actually hoping, I haven't actually told my director on the series, Niles Heckman, this yet, but we're hoping to do the iboga episode in Africa, which we're going to have to raise some funds to get a crew of 5 over there in July. And I'm also hoping we can get an ayahuasca and San Pedro episode done in Peru next year. So I'm hoping we'll get 3 more documentaries out on these powerful transformative substances. And I'm hoping to get a screenplay or 2 out next year as well. So, yeah, you can find me at rakrazam.com, and I'm all over the web. And yeah.
Awesome. Rak, it was such an honor to have you here and share all this knowledge. This is such an important conversation right now. I'm sure we'll be speaking again. And everybody follow Rak, check out his work. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody learned a lot.
Thank you, Beth. And you know what I'd like to say? I'd just like to see this idea that, and it's there's sort of challenge in this, but it's almost like a global psychedelic visioning council of both the entrepreneurial people and the indigenous people to have representation and voices. And, whenever those 2 streams come together, there's a lot of challenges to navigate the dynamics. But just this idea, but maybe beyond the medical psychedelics, that a lot of these stakeholders, you could say, in these spaces of psychedelics and entheogens and healing and connection and planetary medicine could come together and respond to the urgency of these times and to find the others, as the old Tim Leary quote would go, and then to remember ultimately that there are no others, there's just us. But I just see it, we all know the right people, and I just feel that there's something coming up in this horizon, that would be really valuable to have this focus of just coming together, sharing where we're at and how we're going to respond as a global entheogenic psychedelic community. Hoping you'll organize it, Beth.
I know. I'm like, yes. I mean, I've talked about organizing some version of that because it is, it's hard for a lot of people to navigate and to understand, like, okay, what's right or wrong, or what is like my shaman say versus that shaman. And, it's been interesting just talking to so many people with different opinions. But, so far, the majority of people I've interviewed over the years really believe what you believe. It's like, well, there's a demand on the planet. And, what I've witnessed is the plants have an agenda as well. Like, yeah, it's not so much about pillaging and taking it all, but how do we find this balance of getting the healing to the entire world or whoever it's called to, but also doing it in right relationship to the planet, to one another, to indigenous communities, to the animals and the plants that are affected. And
I think that's the key in the Western psychedelic drug from a lab paradigm, the medical paradigm. These things have a great healing capacity. In the indigenous entheogenic paradigm, these things are alive. They have an intelligence, both the plants and the planet. They're connected in relationship to a deeper ecosystem, right? And it's like, it's part of something bigger. And, Terence McKenna had the great quote, it's like the plan, plants, planet. It's in the etymology of the words. The planet has a plan through the plants to connect to the humans, right? They were all part of a larger ecosystem. And our species is not alone. We're being invited back into the garden, back into that plan, to that understanding. And it's not just about then having this medical psychedelic to go back to work on Monday. It's about being part of this family of life on the planet. And so let's do it. Let's let it do us.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much for your wisdom. It was such an honor to have you here, and so good to see you all the way on the other side of the planet.
Wherever you are, you're on top of the center of the world. We're all on the same planet. Thank you, Beth. It's been a pleasure. Let's do it again.
Thank you. And everyone will have another interview next Tuesday on The Psychedelic Entrepreneur. We'll see you then. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're feeling inspired, I'd appreciate it if you showed your love with a review. And check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can also head to bethaweinstein.com to learn more about me and grab my free business growth trainings. Remember, you carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times.